I'm sure you've all heard of the Ronald McDonald House charity. They provide housing for families of sick kids when they're in the hospital. Seems pretty innocent, right? Well, there's another side to the charity. There's a type of Ronald McDonald House, one that not many people know about. There's one in most big cities. You wouldn't find by looking for it. It doesn't have an address. It doesn't have a big sign above the door. It doesn't even have windows. No, the only way you'll find it is if you're taken there. That's how I found it. I've never met my real parents. I've been in and out of foster families and group homes here in Detroit since I was a kid. I'm 15 now, and what I'm referred to as the bad kid. Always causing trouble, getting thrown out and placed under another unsuspecting do-gooder who thinks that they can help me. I always prove them wrong. My caseworker sat across the black metal table, looking weary, frazzled. On the table between us was a thick, letter-sized brown envelope, my case file. "Well, your reputation has preceded you," she said, "and now you only have two options. Military school in Lansing, or the Ronald McDonald House, which has miraculously cleared for you for acceptance." I didn't have the patience for drill sergeants and 5 a.m. Reneville. And how bad could a halfway house named the Another Fast Food Clown possibly be? Ronald McDonald House it was. Dark clouds loomed above me that day. I climbed into the back of my caseworker's town car. My few belongings in a backpack and the clothes on my back, that's all I could take. One of the few belongings I did have was a family photo album, filled with all the pictures of foster families I had with. It was nice to remember some of them, even though I had royalty fucked up with each time. I've had a few cases who went to the Ronald McDonald House, the caseworker said, head at the front of the seat. Things went so well for those kids, I never had to transfer them anywhere else. In fact, the house literally took over their case files and everything. We drove down to downtown Detroit, past all the familiar landmarks. I had been thrown out of one of the foster homes that just got outside town because I snuck into downtown Detroit with some neighbor kids to sneak into a dive bar. Good times. Well, here we are. The car came to a stop. I looked out the window. We had parked in front of a tall, gray, windowless building, which sandwiched between two other industrial buildings on a narrow city street. I noticed there was an address on the building to my left and one on my right, but none on this particular building. Not even a sign. "Are you sure?" I asked, hesitating. As I opened the car door and climbed out of the back seat, I slung my backpack over my shoulder, clinging tightly onto the strap, and followed the caseworker up to the windowless metal doors. She had pressed a buzzer and spoke to someone inside, and the doors clicked to unlock. We walked in. As soon as the metal doors closed behind us, I noticed the pin-drop silence. It was a sort of silence that was oppressive and empty, almost deafens you. Across the dimly lit lobby, there was glass windows with someone inside, a secretary. She was turned away, typing something intently. We walked over to the window, and the caseworker rang the bell on the counter, and the secretary spun around her chair. Her face was painted like a clown, like Ronald McDonald, in fact. She even had the short curly red hair, otherwise she wore a typical white nurse's dress. I wanted to laugh at how bizarre it was, but I couldn't. A chill spot swept down my spine. Something was not right. I watched the nurse and my caseworker interacted. Paperwork was passed through the window. The caseworker said my file was under the glass, and as the nurse slid some papers to sign. As my caseworker signed the papers, the nurse looked at me. Her smile should have been warm and welcoming, but all I saw in her eyes was hunger. "I can't stay here," I stammered loudly. "Take me to the military school in Lansing, please." "What's the matter, sweetie?" the nurse asked, her voice muffled slightly by the glass. "Afraid of clowns?" I looked into her hungry eyes. Now there was a matchless glint as she laughed. My caseworker laughed too, obviously, and said, Now, don't overreact. You hate the military school. Besides, this will be good for you." "Yes," the clown nurse said. "This will be good for you." Before I could object, I heard a slam behind me. I spun around the corner to see a far corner from the lobby, left of the front desk window. There was no one there, just the light that flooded in the corner of the door. Then creeping in the shadows, shrill echoing laughter, and growing shadows along the walls in the side door. "Oh," said the caseworker, "here comes the welcome committee." As I stared in horror, clutching the strap of my backpack, my caseworker patted me on the shoulder for the last time. "Don't worry, honey, it'll be different this time. You'll feel right at home, I promise." She then turned to leave. I felt bile churning up my stomach. "No," I said desperately. "You can't leave me here." "Oh no, I've got to get going. I never did like clowns." And with that she left me. The metal door slammed behind her, and I was alone. I faced on the open doorway by the front desk again. The shadows had almost entered the room, and the piercing laughter was now filling the lobby with sound. I ran for the front doors, pounded and yanked and pushed and screamed. Screamed for help. Screamed for my caseworker. Screamed for anyone. Please, God. I turned to see the nurse behind the glass, smiling at me again. And then they entered, laughing all the while. A whole group of laughing nurses with white clown faces and red hair. Some male, some female, but with all the same terrifying Ronald McDonald makeup. And the dim light of the lobby, I could see the glint of metal tools in their hands coming up to the rear of the pair of clown nurses, rolling on the middle table, complete with restraints. "Get the fuck away from me!" I screamed. I pounded on the metal doors again. "Let me out of here!" They surrounded me, grabbing me as I thrashed and screamed and tried to tear my life away, laughing as I kicked and squirmed. They slammed me onto a rolling table and strapped me down. I looked around wildly. I was surrounded. "Let me go!" I screamed, twisting and turning and pulling at the restraints. They rolled me through the open doorway and down seemingly endless white hallway. They laughed and laughed and laughed. They waved their shiny scalpels and razors and needles were mere inches from my face. Just to make me flinch and scream, this made them laugh harder. The last thing I remember before any of them finally injected me with was the hands. Gloved fingers protruding the inside of my mouth and pulling the sides of my mouth, distorting my screams and forcing an unnatural grin onto my tear-streaked, sweaty face. Hot, rancid breath in my face, and the whispered, perverted voice speaking the words, "We love to see you smile." And as the maniacal laughter seemed to warp and wind down like a dying record player, everything faded to black. I opened my eyes and I was blinded by the bright lights above, shielding my groggy eyes from the porcelain bulbs. I turned on my side and looked around. A cell, tall white walls covered in scratch marks and restraints. A small drain in the corner of my floor, my toilet, perhaps, a door with no windows, and on the floor of the door, my backpack. I tried to sit up. My body ached at the moment. I sat upright. My vision started spinning. Wonder what they drugged me with. I realized I was shivering. I looked down. I wasn't wearing my own clothes anymore. I was wearing a dirty, ripped hospital gown, bright yellow with the pattern of Ronald McDonald heads all over. Nothing underneath. I heard faint, muffled sounds from somewhere in the building. It sounded like screams. I tried to stand, but I couldn't keep my balance. My vision was beginning to stabilize, but my body still felt like rubber. I sank to my knees and crawled over to my backpack. Before I got there, I tried to open the door. As expected, it was locked. I slumped onto the floor beside my backpack and unzipped it. All the remains inside were the photo album. They had taken my notebooks, pens, and my cell phone. Of course they did. I wearily opened the photo album, but instead of the photos that had been there, photos of myself and my previous foster families, photos where I had attempted to look happy and hopeful when I knew I wouldn't be there for long. Instead of those photos, they were like crime scene photos, and in each one, I recognized one of my foster families, brutally murdered and covered in blood. My heart raced and my stomach churned. I began to turn the pages quicker. Each page, a new photo, a new family, new carnage. I recognized the face and the inside of their homes. I had lived with all the people, and now they were all dead. I came to the last few pages. A photo of a house at night. a window of that house. Then inside the house, a dark hallway with the light coming from one doorway. Then a photo of my caseworker, brushing her teeth in the bathroom mirror. Then a photo of her looking at the camera in horror. And then a photo of the caseworker, naked, covered in her own blood, contorted into an unnatural position in her bathtub. I turned over the last page. Written in the back of the photo album were the three words, "You never existed." I felt bile rising in my mouth. I threw the book onto the ground and crawled over to the hole in the floor and vomited. They were right. Having killed everyone who ever knew me, it was as if though I never existed. I heard more faint screaming in the distance. I knew I had to get out. I wiped my vomit off my face with my hospital gown and crawled back over to my backpack. Hopefully they hadn't found my secret weapon. I unzipped the front pocket, reached down into my very bottom, my fingers scraping the fabric. Sure enough, they were flush and the seams of the bag nearly undetectable, the pins I used for picking locks. I told you, I'm a bad kid. I leaned against the door and listened. I could hear footsteps approaching, but as soon as they had come, they had faded in the other direction. I knew I had to work fast. I jigged the handle with one hand and picked the lock with the other hand, it was surprisingly simple. Holding the handle, I slowly pushed myself to my feet. I could maintain my balance now. I pulled the door open just a crack. A clown nurse darted past. My heart almost stopped, but his footsteps didn't show or change, soon faded. He didn't notice me. I poked my head out of the door, seemingly endlessly white hallways in either direction. In the distance, screams were louder, coming from all around. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. I decided to go to the right, passing the doors, identical to the door I had been behind. I heard screams and sobbing coming from behind each one. I stopped for a moment at one door. I heard a crying of a child inside. I jiggled the handle to see if I could let him out. Locked. I kept moving, looking behind me every few seconds to make sure that no nurses had come down to the hallway. Then I passed a set of white double doors. I stopped for the moment. The word "Play Place" was written in tall, thin letters across the width of both doors. I heard more screaming coming from within, the screams of multiple people, and laughter, the insane, shrill laughter of the clown nurses. I shuddered. I was afraid to find out what sort of torture was happening inside, and I knew I had to keep moving. I saw a door ahead with the stairway symbol. I headed for it. As I opened the door, I glanced behind me and saw two clown nurses emerging from the play place room. The white nurse outfits were covered in streaks of blood. I quickly shut off myself into the stairwell, hoping they hadn't noticed me. The stairwell was dimly lit, with cement walls and rusty railings. I looked behind the doors I had just closed. There was a red number 5 on the door, so I must be on the 5th floor. I decided to get to the ground level. Each footstep echoed as I began to descend down the stairs. I couldn't hear the screaming anymore, just a low, deep humming sound, like pipes on the walls. It was a welcoming respite. I finally came to the door numbered 1. The staircase seemed to ascend a few floors lower, but I stopped here and slowly peeked through the door. More white hallways, no more clown nurses to be seen. So far, so good. I stepped through the door and walked into the hallway. I noticed that I couldn't hear any screaming on this floor, just the buzz of the fluorescent tube lights above. I came to the end of the hallway and find another set of double doors and a large red cross, the kind you see on lifeguard stand or a first aid kit. It was painted across within the width of the doors. I presented my ear to the door. All I heard was slow, rhythmic pulse, like a machine at work, and faintly a beeping sound, like you hear in a hospital room. I knew I shouldn't open the door. I knew this wasn't the exit. I knew I should keep looking. But I had to see. I turned the handle. It wasn't locked. I peeked inside. It was a cavernous white room. Fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed. I saw the wires hanging around, and hanging from the ceiling in rows. Kids. kids in hospital gowns like mine, attached to white wooden crosses, asphyxiated to the ceiling, literally crucified. They were all silent, their heads drooping forward, their eyes were either closed or staring at nothing. Some even twitched a bit, but most were still. Their crosses swung back and forth very slightly. And the hanging wires? They weren't wires. They were intravenous tubes attached to the kids' wrists. Tubes were sucking out their blood. I almost vomited again, right then and there. In the very center of the room, and minutes to the rows of hanging crosses, I could now see where the rhythmic, pulsing sound came from. A large steel cylinder, which seemed to be collecting blood from all the tangled tubes that dangled from the kids' wrists. I opened my mouth to scream, to cry out in anger. All I could say was, "What the fuck?" That's when the alarms began to sound, loud, piercing, like the police sirens of hell. They must have realized I was missing. I shut the doors and frantically glanced around the hallway to see if anyone was coming. No signs yet. I ran for the stairwell. As soon as I entered the stairwell, I heard laughter from above, echoing, reverberating throughout the stairwell. The clown nurses were coming. I stumbled down the stairs as fast as I could. I must have gone down over these stories before I reached the basement. I found myself running through a dark, sewer-like hallway with the small light bulbs overhead every 10 yards or so. The smell of decaying, rotting flesh grew more and more pungent as I ran. The laughter continued behind me. I managed to glance behind to see a group of them running after me. I saw them coming into the light, and then became the silhouettes again. The smiling faces and gleaming knives and needles pushing my adrenaline to the max. I ran past the alcoves, full of stacked, rotting corpses, but I didn't stop. I couldn't think of anything but escape. I turned a corner and found myself facing the metal rungs of the ladder in the wall. I climbed until my head smacked the ceiling. Below me, the shadows and laughter grew closer. Their footsteps were slowed. They were so close that they knew for it. I pushed at the ceiling above me, heaving upwards, panting and screaming. The clowns were below me, laughing and waving their scalpels. Something cut my leg. I screamed and pushed one last time. The ceiling gave away as a manhole overslammed on my assault above, a circular opening. I climbed down and frantically pushed the manhole cover back to the hole, blocking out the laughter of the clown nurses below. I laid there on top of the manhole cover for a few minutes. As I caught my breath, rain fell onto my skin. The turbulent night sky above was a welcome sight. I looked around. Abandoned buildings, broken glass, no lights, no cars, no signs of life at all. A police siren somewhere in the distance, then silence. I climbed to my feet, a pain shot from my leg. I looked down and saw the cut on my ankle where a clown nurse had slashed me. Bastards. Limping as best I could, I tried to walk. "Hello?" I called out. The only answer was a distant roll of thunder. "Somebody! Help me, please!" My foot fell on something soft and mushy. I looked down. A newspaper. I peeled off the wet asphalt. Most of the ink had faded, but I was able to make out the date. July 13th, 1992. I dropped it, an icy dread filling my stomach. I kept walking. "Can anybody hear me?" I screamed. "Please! Anyone! Please!" My words faded into delirious sobs. I stood there for a moment as the rain soaked up through my thin hospital gown. I shivered as the wind blew. Then I saw a light in the distance. It was a big yellow M in the sky. A McDonald's, of course. I limped towards it. I came to the McDonald's and I saw apart from the M, the rest of the building was completely dark. I walked cautiously towards the broken windows and looked in. Darkness. I turned and surveyed the play place outdoors playground. 10-foot-tall structures of colored tubes for kids to crawl through. Sitting at one of the benches was a familiar figure, the Ronald McDonald statue. You know, as one you could sit beside him and it looks like he's got your arm around your shoulders. Every kid's seen it. I shuddered at the sight. The doors were unlocked. I walked in, out of the rain and silence, darkness. I noticed that the deck decor was not like the modern McDonald's you see. It was still the same as the one in the 80s, with the same white plastic booths with the red and yellow tiles, and the wind seemed to whisper throughout the broken windows. I noticed something on the front counter, a black rectangle. I got closer. A laptop. A nearly new laptop. I let out a soft, delirious sigh. I knew what I was supposed to do. I took the laptop outside beside the Ronald McDonald statue. I opened up the laptop and began to type this story. The rain is falling on the keys, but I don't care. There's nothing left to do but wait. Because I've been noticing out in the corner of my eye, Ronald is trying to look over my shoulder. He's laughing now. All I can do is join him.